Okay, so today we're going to learn about a really basic but extremely critical debate skill. So this is called an AGD. And so we're going to talk about what that is, and we're going to talk about types of AGDs that work really well in debate. So first of all, this is basically the beginning of a speech. And sometimes it's just one sentence, but I've had kids who they had an entire paragraph. So AGD, we love our acronyms in debate. AGD stands for attention getting device, or sometimes you'll hear people call it attention grabbing device. Those are totally synonymous, so either way is great. But it's basically a hook, right, that you've learned about in your ELA class. And they, I think, are a little bit overlooked, that debaters will take their judges' attention for granted, but it's your job to earn their attention, because the whole point of an AGD or an attention getter is to make them want to keep listening to you. So there's different types, right? I also teach creative writing, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend these types of AGDs for creative writing, but these are ones that typically are effective for debate. Although out of the 5 types of speech and debate, it just depends. Sometimes you will do a different one based on your type, but I'll teach that to you in the future. So I think the best thing to start out with is to watch some examples. And as you're watching these, I want you to kind of be thinking like a debate judge and ask yourself, which one of these actually made me want to keep listening? Because even though these are real, I don't think all of them are actually that effective.
I need to make a confession at the outset here. A little over 20 years ago, I did something that I regret. Something that I'm not particularly proud of. Something that in many ways I wish no one would ever know. But that here I feel kind of obliged to reveal.
So before the big reveal here, the reason why this one is effective, in my opinion, is there's some mystery here. He's not just jumping right in. He's kind of making us want to know the answer, so we're on the hook.
In the late 1980s, in a moment of youthful indiscretion, I went to law school. Now,
oh no, not a lawyer, right? So humor can work, but it's much easier said than done, right? If I'm like, hey, be funny, to actually do that, to actually get a real genuine laugh from people, does take a good amount of crafting those words perfectly. Okay, so Steve Jobs, right? He's the one who founded Apple.
I'm honored to be with you today for your commencement from one of the finest universities in the world. Truth be told, I never graduated from college, and this is the closest I've ever gotten to a college graduation.
So for someone who had that much money and power to admit something so huge, the shock factor is real when it comes to hooking your audience.
The people, in order to form a more perfect union. 221 years ago, in a hall that still stands across the street, a group of men gathered and with these simple words launched America's improbable experiment in democracy. Farmers and scholars, statesmen and patriots who had traveled across the ocean to escape tyranny and...
Okay, so even though former President Obama is a good public speaker, the debate is a puzzle, that it's not just one piece that's going to make you win something, it's how you say the words plus the words themselves. So in my opinion, that one wasn't actually that engaging. I wasn't very hooked because it just wasn't interesting enough. This one, I'm going to be really honest with you, is my least favorite. This guy, on one hand, totally has the enthusiasm piece. His passion and excitement is absolutely gold star level, but what he's saying is confusing. Here we go.
I can't thank you guys for the opportunity. Let me tell you something. If tomorrow wasn't promised, what would you get for today? Forget everything else. Forget everything else. Forget that there was any sunlight left. what would you spend today thinking about?
That kid just looks
Yourself?
confused.
Or the man that's beside you?
When I spoke here last winter, this nation was facing the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. We were losing an average of 700,000 jobs per month.
So this one I think is more effective because that number is shocking. So again, that shock factor is important. Okay, so let's break down the different types of hooks or AGDs that can be effective in debate. So factual or statistical AGDs, this is where you're using a number or something that is not debatable at all to kind of shock the audience. So clearly it does need to be relevant. It can't be something that's not connected to your topic. And you also need to be careful that it comes from a source that's actually trustworthy. Here's a good example. So I could start a speech about like cigarette smoking. I could grab my judge's attention with this. According to the Center for Disease and Control, cigarette smoking kills more than 480,000 Americans each year, with more than 41,000 of these deaths from exposure to second-hand smoke. This is a problem that's easily preventable. So, right, having numbers like that, that can be shocking and can grab people's attention. But if you don't like that kind of AGD, you could also have a quote as your attention getter. So these should be interesting. They need to be important. It needs to be relevant. It should support your views. And so here's a good example. Former First Lady Michelle Obama once said, quote, "If my future were determined just by my performance on a standardized test, I wouldn't be here. I guarantee you that." Close quote. So the reason why that one works is because that's a pretty, again, shocking thing for someone who had that much power to admit. Plus, most people, when they hear that name, even if you like her or don't like her, it doesn't matter. Most people know who that is, so that's why that one is effective. This is one of my former debaters. He was in my class probably 13 years ago, and he won the state tournament in Lincoln Douglas debate. And so his whole speech started with, well-known philosopher Ian King posited is just a fancy way of saying said, quote, "We should let people choose for themselves unless we know their interests better than they can," close quote. This quote is the basis that leads me to affirm this year's topic. So that might have gone over your head a little bit because it was a different topic than it is this year, but that does connect specifically to what the topic was that year. Okay, so bold statements can be effective if you do them well, but they can be, I would say, probably the most challenging. So this is where you're going to have a sentence that's not a question. It's a statement, which means it ends with a period. It's supposed to be brief, but really thought-provoking. Most of the time, these are controversial because we want to stir up emotion. And so in this situation, we would want to avoid using the phrase "I think" or "in my opinion" only because it can make it seem less powerful. In other situations in debate, you can use those phrases, but just not if as part of your AGD. So here's an example. Rewarding everyone who participates with a trophy, regardless of success or failure, is not only ridiculous, but damaging to any child. So I'm not saying I actually agree or disagree with any of these AGDs, but just generally, that is a bold statement. That is controversial, it stirs up emotion, it's thought-provoking, and it's a sentence, so it's a bold statement. Okay, so here was a funny example of a bold statement. This was a student who won the state debate tournament in oratory speaking. So he goes like this: deep fried Twinkies or ho-hos? Mom or dad? The smiling poop emoji or the creepy clown emoji? Instagram or Snapchat? Trump or not Trump? I mean, come on, what's an oratory speech without a Trump joke? Think back to when America was born, land of liberty and justice, the dream of the whole human race came true. The world seemed to figure out ways to make itself a better place. But there's still one thing we have to figure out every day: choices. So see how that's a longer AGD, which sometimes can be really effective. And so it's a bold statement because of the weird examples that he used. and it led him straight into his topic, which was choices. So anecdotal AGDs can be really, really effective. So an anecdote is a fancy way of saying story. So this is where you use your own story or someone else's story or an anecdote that makes a point about the topic. I would say that these can be the most powerful type of evidence and AGDs in debate because they usually get a strong emotional connection and reaction from your audience. So here's an example. Eleanor began smoking at age 15, completely unaware of what she was doing to her body. She continued to smoke over 2 packs of cigarettes per day. She soon found out she had oral cancer, and doctors were forced to remove half of her jaw. And that's a real story. And so to think about that, even though it's not my story, right, it can be someone else's story, but again, can get a powerful reaction. So here's what your assignment is going to be. We're going to practice those different types of AGDs. And you can choose on your assignment if you want to focus on just one of the debate topics this year, or you can mix and match. But these are some of the real topics for this year. So I'm going to switch over to the assignment. You only have to do 4 different AGDs. So this isn't a super long assignment. You're going to pick, like I said, 1 or more of these topics, and you're going to just write the best AGD you can. This is practice. I'm not expecting perfection. I do encourage you to do a tiny bit of research to make your AGD extra awesome, but don't spend too long because this is due at the end of the period. So here's some of the topics. One of them is about exploring the Arctic more. You could, if you don't like that one, you could focus all your AGDs about how artificial intelligence harms education. If you don't like that one, you could talk about how nuclear weapons are immoral, or you could talk about any major current event that's happening in the state or the nation or the world. And if you hate all of those, you can pick any other persuasive topic of your choice. So here's what the assignment looks like. Right here, you're going to write a fact or a statistic, a quote, a bold statement, and an anecdotal quote. So it looks just like the examples I just showed you. Here is the information to remind you what this type of AGD should include. Here's an example, and here's where you're writing yours. So I could do, like, let's say I was like, okay, I want to do the nuclear weapons are immoral. I could do all of these 4 AGDs about the nuclear weapon topic, or I could do one about current events, I could do one about the nuclear weapons, I could do one about exploring the Arctic, and I could do one about artificial intelligence. Either way is totally fine. So you are also, just for today, you're also allowed to make up your AGDs. They don't actually have to be real. So if you're kind of stuck and you're not finding what you need while you're Googling, it's okay to just totally make it up. So there you go. Get started.